We'll go ahead and get started here. The Columbian's editorial board is happy to welcome Susan Hutchinson, the chair of the state Republican Party. Thank you for joining us. We're here to talk about Washington politics, and we'll work in some questions about the Clark County Republican Party and look ahead to 2016. And just so you know, we are videotaping this for use on our website. We post all of our meetings unedited for the benefit of our readers. Also like to welcome Mike, and I'm going to let you pronounce your last name.
It's Tufekchev.
Okay, he's field staff with the state party, and I would have butchered the pronunciation anyway, so thank you. Let's start out, Susan. What is your reaction? What is the party's reaction to this week's election, and how did it look for Republicans?
Well, I look at every election from the state point of view, and we just added one more seat to the legislature, and we are one seat away from controlling both chambers. And when you consider how far we've come in a very short period of time, I think there's great reason for Republicans to feel that we've got a very effective party in place at the state level. And so I will just share with you some details, because I am meeting with all the editorial boards before the end of the year. And in meeting with the Olympian, they really hadn't done the analysis, and they're right there in Olympia, and so I just provided them some of the stuff that we use as talking points to explain what's happened. So this might be useful to you. 2012 was not a good year for Republicans in this state, as you know, statewide. And so things had to change, and I was elected in 2013 to be the chairman in August of 2013, so I've been there a little over 2 years. We needed to make some major changes at the party level in order to be effective. And so starting with a special election in 2013, we flipped a seat from Democrat to Republican. That was Jan Angel in the Senate. And then in 2014, we flipped 4 more seats, one in the Senate, actually 5 more seats, 1 in the Senate and 4 in the House. And then we just finished a special election in the 30th district, which is Federal Way, and we flipped that too. So as the press release said and the email blast this week, touchdown GOP, with the extra point from Terry Hickel in the 30th, we now have 7 flipped seats since 2013, and the Democrats have 0. So that's why there's this massive change, and we believe that's really good for the people of the state. So I see my job is to elect good Republicans, to work with good Democrats, to do good for the people of Washington State. I'm very much in favor of the 2-party system. You mentioned that in your editorial on how important it was to have strong parties. I think it's good for elected officials to have to what we call working together is most often a hard negotiation where the people of the state benefit in the long run. And so I think when you have one party rule for too long, which has happened in Washington State, politicians get lazy, they take the voters for granted, they start doing things to please their base, which is not the majority, and things get off kilter, and that's certainly what's happened under Democratic rule. So so that is my point of view from the statewide. So we are really, really encouraged. Going into 2016, we are planning to elect a Republican governor. We believe that Jay Inslee is very vulnerable, and he has a record. Instead of being an unidentifiable congressman standing by a tractor and holding his grandbaby, I think now we can get past the image that the Democratic Party constructed of him as a candidate and get to the facts of what he's been like as a governor. And so
Now, that said, what would it take for not only governor, but for any statewide position? Is it reasonable to think that Washington will elect a Republican?
absolutely, and that's one of the reasons I'm speaking to all the editorial boards, because I don't think anybody realizes what's really going on in the state. And so I'm a mechanic. The job of a state party is provide the infrastructure for the candidates. it is my job to do the voter registration and the voter ID and the training of the citizen army and the ability to call out large groups of volunteers to support, to message to the Republicans that I'm able to reach through the various social media. And so in doing that, I provide for the candidates what they cannot do for themselves. You know, most candidates hit the ground running. They've got to be talking issues, they've got to be making speeches, walking in parades, doing all those things. So I do the mechanical infrastructure. That's what the party is supposed to be doing. So in order to do that, we have to understand what we have access to in the world of data. And we are very connected to the RNC's database, which is now the best in history. And I don't mean just for Republicans. We got skunked by the Obama machine, and that was a great learning experience, and we're not going to let that happen again. So the RNC is working very hard. Every single voter, each one of you, including you, Lauren, we know exactly what kind of voter you are according to the extrapolation of data. And it's kind of fun to put that in the hands of some of our Republican activists, because they get so upset if they are soft Republicans instead of hard Republicans, but it's because of the magazines they read or the car they drive or what they name their kids, or, you know, this is how you extrapolate data. You figure out in a population what data points indicate your voting preferences. So it really works for a population. It doesn't work for an individual. So Lauren might be a soft Republican when she looks at her name on our database, and I don't know what she is, but she may say, no, wait a minute, I'm not, I'm an independent. But it's because of those data points, they all added up and pointed. So when we go to Lauren's door and we say, are you a Republican or Democrat? And she says, I'm an independent. Then we say, okay, how do you feel about, and we start listing hot button issues, and then we can really define what she really is. And so, although some reporters I've come across over the years say I don't even vote because that's how I stay objective. But I don't know that that's the case with you or anybody else these days. But
Pick on me for a while.
Well, it's you know, Lauren is in a certain target demographic for campaigns, and so it's kind of fun to look at that. And we have access to a database that has 400 data points on every single voter.
But when you talk about these data points and the broad collection of information, doesn't that tell you that this is a decidedly blue state? And certainly that's what elections
That's
have
what I'm
pointed
getting
out.
to. We have that as a point of reference, that kind of a database. But we also have the ability to look at the last two elections. We could go back even further, but because life is so transient and people move, we have gone back to 2012 and 2014, and we can take a look at the voting patterns in a very high turnout election in 2012 and a moderate turnout election in 2014, and we can look at how people voted, and we can extrapolate from that how many Republicans we have in a county based on voter turnout and the actual vote count for McKenna versus Inslee, and we can figure out how many Republican voters are in that county. And so we have 39 counties, so here's the punchline. We have 39 counties, 32 of them voted Republican. The second largest population county in the state is Pierce County. It's now a red county. Of course, King County is the largest population, and it's blue. Seattle is deep blue.
So how do you overcome that?
Well, I just want to give you the facts that, and I've never had anyone prove otherwise since I've been making this speech. We are exactly split down the middle with a slight edge to Republicans, like maybe a couple thousand voters who are Republican, higher than Democrat. And that's the definition of a swing state. Now, if you were to ask anybody in Washington, D.C. to describe Washington State, they would say, oh, it's a blue state. You've got a governor and 2 senators, because that's as far as they look. So we're starting to get their attention back in the political epicenter of the country because we are now so close to having an entirely Republican legislature. And that says something about a state that needs to be looked at. And so the legislature is voted on in our state, of course, every 2 years for the House and half of the Senate. So it's a very clear indication of a timely indication of where the voters' heads are. So, so the basic bottom line, you say, okay, well, if there are slightly more Republicans and Democrats in this state, why don't you seem to win? And the reason why is because in the definition of a swing state, you swing one way or the other. And so in the last decade, in these key elections, we've swung to the Democratic side. I could argue that in 2004 we swung to the Republican side in the governor's race because I do believe that Dino won that election, and I served on a task force put together by a Democratic county
That said, when
executive
was the
to
last
solve
time that
that
we
problem.
elected a Republican governor?
Well, that's the key, is we've got the longest losing streak in the nation's.
When
in the nation.
was the
It'll
last?
be 32 years.
When was the last time, and this one I don't know, when was the last time Washington voted for a Republican in presidential race?
Ronald Reagan.
Okay,
Yeah, so it's been a long time.
yeah.
So here's the thing. Why is it that if all of our data and all of our analysis of elections says that this is a state that's split down the middle, why is it that the Democrat wins the swing every time? And so that's the other thing you can find very easily by crunching the numbers, and that is that the voter turnout in our red counties is significantly lower than the statewide average. So our strong Republican county, I call them county regions because Spokane and Whitman County is one. Benton and Yakima is another. Cowlitz, Clark is another. And then the standalones of Pierce and Snohomish, all of which undervote. They don't vote to the statewide average. And King County votes well above the statewide average, obviously, because something's got to, to get an average, there's a counterbalance. And so why don't our Republican voters vote? Now, these are registered Republicans. We don't talk about a population at large. We care about those who registered. And so why don't they vote? And we believe that the reason they don't vote is because they're demoralized by Seattle. We hear it anecdotally all over the state. Why should I vote? It doesn't matter. Seattle always wins. And the further left Seattle goes, which it certainly has in the last half decade. I live in the University District of Seattle and have for 35 years, so I've seen it very clearly. The further left they go, the more easily the rest of the state can define itself as being different from Seattle. So you have voters who just have lost any sense that it matters. And
How do you combat that?
well, one of them is great candidates. Republicans like candidates. They really want to get behind somebody who they can believe in. So one is great candidates. Another is a sense of, there are issues that matter to their lives and their families, and those issues are clearly defined. And then the third is that somebody has reached out to them. And I say this in a high-tech world, that high touch is still the key to winning elections. And we've proven it. That's how we've flipped all 7 of those seats, is voter-to-voter contact. And I would love to be able to say that the efficiencies of the high-tech world allow us to sit at desks and just send out social media messages, and that's how you win. That's a small part of it, but you really win elections at the door. It's expensive and it's time-consuming, but that's the way you win. And so that's one of the strategies that we've employed. And we know it works because in the 7 swing districts that we won in, we had to hold and we had to gain in 2014, and in all of them that we played in, we won and we won big. So,
Can we talk a little bit about Clark County?
yeah, I'd love to.
So in your most sort of honest description of your view of of Clark County and the Republicans here, how do you describe what's going on around here?
Entertaining, lively,
But I mean,
certainly not a sleepy place.
well, okay, yeah, I'm going with all those words, but you know, if you were just sort of like talking amongst friends,
Yeah.
how would you describe it?
I think you all have, I was impressed, you know, the things I've read over the months about your assessment of what's going on. I know you've been very involved. I think you have a pretty good understanding of what is at play.
That's the politically correct way of saying something, I think. Do you think there should be some changes in the Republican hierarchy here?
So as chairman of the state, as you know, I cannot, I've got 39 counties,
Got it.
all of which have drama. And
Not as much as this one,
no, I think you all are number one.
though. Okay.
We're number one at something.
There you go.
They win.
But you know, there's also something kind of wonderful. When elections are interesting, more people are talking and participating. When elections don't get anybody's interest, you really can't. It's sort of like Donald Trump in the debates. You know, it's you've got a little bit of a Trumpism going on down here where people are paying attention and they're talking about it. I stayed last night with folks, I'm pointing at you because I know you've been involved at Peace Health.
Mm-hmm.
And I have old friends who, he's an executive now down here, and they just recently moved a year ago. So it's not like they're born and raised in Clark County. And they could talk about what has been going on in this election cycle clearly, even though neither one of them is involved in that process. They're not, you know, in the political parties or anything. But it was so interesting last night chatting with them, and they were very knowledgeable. Well, for local elections, that's amazing. And so there's a reason why it feels lively. And that is because you've got some interesting personalities who've been involved.
How important do you think a daily newspaper is in this process?
I think it's way more important than people give it credit for, mostly because we think of the papers that are in the big metropolitan areas. I don't think the Seattle Times has nearly the impact of a paper, a medium-sized, can we call you that, a medium-sized metropolitan paper? And I was just at the Longview Daily News, and they are deeply involved in Cowlitz County politics in 19th District, LD, and I think it's kind of wonderful to see. It feels, you know, I've been to Cowlitz County maybe 3 times, and I could pick up in our conversation at the paper that it would be, it's a good place to call home. You know, there's a community spirit in Cowlitz County that makes it a good place to call home.
Do you think it would be, for example, a politically good move or a bad move to get behind a boycott of the daily newspaper?
All right, so we're moving on to a different subject. You could ask that, is it a very good move to censure your newly re-elected congresswoman? You know, there are a lot of things that have happened in the last couple of years that I'm aware of, and of course I don't get involved with county party politics unless there's been some violation. One of the things in
But don't you counsel at all? I mean, that's not part of your role at all to tell a
if
particular county, hey,
people-
maybe you should get it together a little bit?
If in the counties people contact me and ask for help and advice, I counsel.
Well, did that ever
Correct.
happen from Clark County?
No,
So
no.
nobody's calling you to say we need help?
Not the current, leadership in
Okay.
the central committee. So, and that's where I think it's very important not to lump in categories that are, I noticed you used, I believe the word far right or right wing, I can't remember in your.
Right-wing bloggers. That's
Right,
what-
yeah, but there was
connected.
something else that you'd said, maybe calling it far right. I don't know how many different categories of Republicans you've got in Clark County, but it's almost like the Pac-12 or something. I bet you could divide it up into 12 different categories. And so, one of the things I weighed in on was the censure. Some months ago, maybe about 11 months ago, I can't remember when I think there's in that little packet, there's the article. Lauren, did you do that article? I can't remember. The one,
Is it that one?
my quote is at the very end where I said, I don't think there's gonna be a censure, the good people of Clark County will support their congresswoman. And in fact, there wasn't. So there was talk of it that made a lot of news. But I did weigh in because I was concerned about the Republican brand and the Republican name. And so one of the rules of our party, one of the policies of our party is that we support our incumbents. And when you have an incumbent who is reelected with 62%, what you're really doing is you're supporting the democratic process, which is the majority vote. And so that's where I think sometimes people get confused because they, and this happens all over the state and probably all over the nation, people who feel strongly about an issue or a candidate and believe they're right, think that their opinion supersedes majority rule. And in the democratic process, majority rules. And so I think you have a beautiful example of that in this election. A couple days ago, you had majority rule, well, plurality rule at least, and that settles in this jurisdiction. That settles the election. But the idea is basically you've got to get the most votes, and when you do, the people have spoken.
So when you, and I get what you just said there, if you've got a Republican incumbent, you're going to support that Republican incumbent. So are you saying that if you're, and I know you guys do a lot of polling, and I know you have a feel for the strengths and weaknesses of various, let's say for example, state senators. And if you see some troubling numbers for an incumbent, let's say for example, state senator, do you still just support that incumbent regardless?
So there are several organizations that are involved in getting people elected. So in the Senate, on the Senate side, the premier organization is the Senate caucus. And they're the ones that are figuring out where they want to be in the next election cycle. And it could be like we're going to lose a senator, hopefully, because he's going to win the state auditor. Mark Malosha has put his hat in the ring to be state auditor, and so he's going to lose his Senate seat. And so the Senate caucus has to figure out, can we tolerate that? Do we have somebody good who can run and has a good chance of winning?
You don't
So-
get involved in that?
I'll talk with them about it, I'll give them my opinion, but they're the ones who
Right.
have the, the support system that comes around Senate candidates and incumbents to help them succeed.
So you think our state senator Don Benton is going to get the support from your group and from the Senate caucus?
I don't know what's going to happen with Don, but I have seen some poll numbers.
What do they look like?
They didn't look very good for him.
Right.
And so I know that the Senate caucus is taking a look at it and seeing if that seat is one that is vulnerable. And,
So is it possible in a situation like that that the Senate caucus, let's use them as opposed to you, might suggest to Don that it's time to move along? Is that a possibility?
I don't know the process that they will use, but I do know that their job is to make sure they don't lose any seats.
Right.
So it's not personal about Don.
No, I get that.
It's just, it's about a seat, and a seat has a designation, and it's in a place. And so they're gonna be looking at all the seats around the state
Right.
that are vulnerable or sure wins.
And I'm just
And
asking.
those are the ones that they can say, okay, we don't need to worry about the sure win, and let's put all of our efforts into the vulnerable seats.
But when we talk about all of our efforts, sometimes that effort might be, it's time for a new face. That's a possibility, right?
Well, I think that's the joy of politics, you know, it's so dynamic. None of us know what's gonna happen next year. We don't even know who the Republican candidate is going to be, and very likely will be a new face. And so the same thing could happen here. And I don't know enough at this point as to what is going on within that conversation. And also, I mean, a senator represents a constituency, and in that constituency, there are a lot of people with strong opinions, and some of their opinions weigh more than other people's opinions. And I think
But at the end of the day, the voters' opinions weigh the most.
Exactly,
And
and
when those numbers don't look good,
That's right.
that you could lose a seat, you know,
Yeah.
based on those numbers.
So, the question for you all that I would ask is, are you licking your chops to get somebody new in there? And are you thinking, would be sure great to get a Democrat that could defeat Don Benton, so let's make sure that he's the one who ends up the Republican candidate? Or do you say, we need to find some strong Republican who can be a good candidate against whoever the Democrats decide to run?
Right. Of
Which
course.
is,
In a
which
situation
is your
like that,
editorial.
if there is a vulnerable Republican state senator or any other office, how did they go about finding another Republican to, who chooses that? Who decides that?
Well, this is one of the funny myths about politics. In fact, somebody was talking to me last night about, finding candidates. That the party's job is to find the candidates to run for all these elections. And what was I doing about, it was a very local position in one of the counties. And what was I doing about it? And I kind of laughed to myself, because I thought, I can't even determine who's going to run at the highest levels for a senator position. For all we know, when Maria Cantwell comes up in 2 years, there are going to be 10 Republicans that decide she's vulnerable. But here's the rule. If somebody is perceived as vulnerable, there are lots of candidates who throw their hat in the ring. And no party structure can convince somebody who is sure that they want to run, not to run. And there's also no party structure that can convince somebody who is perfect to run if they don't want to. So the idea of recruiting is partly a myth, because people self-select. They decide they're going to run. And it's the primary system that defines whether or not they made a good judgment on that or not. So,
I wanted to go back to answer the question that you asked a second ago. The Columbian both supports editorially Republicans and Democrats, and anybody who wants to take the time to go back to look on our endorsement list, you will find that it's pretty evenly split. So we honestly, and the facts bear this out, really don't care whether a Republican or a Democrat gets elected. What we care about is the best person that could represent our community in the best possible way. And if that's a Republican, then so be it. If it's a Democrat, then so be it. So we're not interested in what party a good candidate might come from. We're just interested in good candidates. We are, however, also interested and will hold people up to the light of public scrutiny, people who aren't very good for this community, be them a Democrat or a Republican. So I just wanted to make clear that we're not licking our chops to get a Democrat elected, and in fact we endorse several Republicans in this latest election. So we're interested in good candidates, and that's just the way it is. But we know when there are people out there that aren't good for this community. We recognize that, and we write about it, both Democrats and Republicans. That's what the press does. That's our job. So I just wanted to sort of get that straight.
Now, you talked about different categories of Republicans, and a lot of people perceive that in recent years at the national level is a divide among the Republican Party. It would seem to me, and tell me if your data bears this out, it would seem that for a statewide race in Washington, the Republican would have to be pretty darn moderate, at least compared to some of the current national Republicans. Is that true, or do you worry about that in seeking out candidates?
Well, moderate is, give me 12 subjects and let's define what moderate is. I think Marco Rubio could very easily be a formidable opponent to Hillary Clinton. For what we know about him now, I don't know, maybe you know more about him than I do.
He's a Gator.
He is a Gator, that's right. By the way, where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Chicago, but I worked in Fort Myers
Okay.
when I graduated from the University of Florida.
Okay, but what took you to Florida?
University of Florida,
Oh, okay.
the journalism school.
Oh, all right, very good. So, where were we?
We were on Marco Rubio.
Marco Rubio, yeah. What we know of him today, I think he could be a very formidable opponent to her nationwide. Is he liberal or is he conservative or is he moderate? Well, give me the subject. And so it
But
depends.
let's talk about in Washington,
Yeah,
where
okay.
we definitely tend to be more liberal than many parts of the country.
Okay.
So do you need a moderate Republican for a statewide office, for governor, for state treasurer, for lieutenant governor?
I think you need somebody that people can identify with. And if they can't, if the candidate is not well defined, then they may vote on stereotypes or along party lines. But most of our voters nowadays are identifying themselves as independents. So there's a great opportunity for good candidates to be very active in winning the hearts as well as the minds of our voters. And I think people are ready for that in this state. And I think that's what the surprise is going to be in 2016, is that we're going to have some candidates that win the hearts. And I don't think, quite frankly, in 2012, we had a superstar running on the Republican side. And I like to say, can you imagine being a Democrat in 2012 when Jay Inslee is the candidate against the sole candidate against Rob McKenna? I mean, the reason why he was the sole candidate is because nobody thought Rob could lose. He was so well respected. He had won 2 statewide races. He was known to be really smart. People,
Good in King County, too.
yes, and yeah, he was popular in King County, and the Democrats were stuck with this.
So
Who cares?
So if
Congressman.
McKenna couldn't win, then what would it take for the Republicans to win?
Well, there were 5 reasons why McKenna lost, and one of them was the party. The Republican Party was not functional at that time and could not provide the infrastructure that was needed in order to win. And so we call it a machine. I think it's as good as metaphor as any. It's true. If you're running well, you are like a machine, and the Democrats had a very good machine. I ran against it in total naivete in 2009 for King County Executive. I won the primary. I lost the election significantly, and it was because the machine kicks in after the primary, and does a very good job on the Democratic side, winning elections. But I think what happened in Federal Way, that race, the Democrats knew just as well as the Republicans how important that one single race was. It is the most expensive race on the House side in the state's history, and our machine beat their machine. But the Republicans have the fight in them, and the Democrats don't. The Democrats respond and say, well, it was voter turnout. Yeah. Voter turnout. How do you define voter turnout? Well, our voters voted and your voters didn't. Just like in 2012, your voters voted and our voters didn't. That's why you won in 2012, voter turnout, duh. It's, and what makes voters turn out? It's candidates, issues, passion, excitement, voter-to-voter contact. It's money. There are all kinds of reasons that people get behind a candidate enough to take the time to pull out the ballot, mark their ballot, and put it in the mail with a stamp.
Well, what's going on with Rob? He seems to be a little bit more public than he had been lately.
He is in private practice. He's got, I think, 3 kids in college.
Is he itching to run again?
No,
No?
no. He may seek, I think Rob would be a terrific Supreme Court
He's a good guy.
Justice in our state. I think he would make a great Supreme Court justice in the U.S. Supreme Court. He's got the intellect and the experience. I think he'd be superb. I don't know, I haven't had a conversation with him about his future, but for the first time in his life, he's not a public servant, and he's actually bringing in an income that can afford to pay for college tuition. So more power to him. And I do know that he has a great platform on the national level, working on some issues with state attorneys general. So he's a man of influence, and he should be. So, we love Rob McKenna, and we believe he would have been a very good governor.
What about Dino Rossi? What's up with him?
I see Dino from time to time. He's very active. He's always a good speaker at Republican events.
That poor guy just can't get a couple of thousand extra votes.
I know. And he doesn't fade from public life. He's always working to help people get elected, and
Good for him.
he's a good man. And he's in the world of real estate investment, and so
So he can pay for college education as
he's
well.
got a bunch in college too. Exactly. So anyway, we've got some very promising senators and House members. Bruce Danmeyer is leading the Senate, and he's going to run for Pierce County Executive. I think he will be a candidate one day for governor. Extremely smart. Naval Academy graduate. My husband's a Naval Academy graduate, so we like that. And
If you had to guess, how many Republicans will run for governor next year?
well, right now we have one.
Right.
And I think it could very well be that that's all
Okay.
we need. And remember, a lot is going on under the surface that you don't see.
What
But,
is it? That we're not seeing.
It's the grassroots organization.
Oh, I thought there
Yeah.
might have been some insight into it.
No. It's just grassroots growth. And Bill Bryant made a fabulous speech last night at the Lower Columbian Republicans United, which is a new group that formed in Cowlitz County, and to bring Republicans together. So they had a large turnout, and it was a very successful event, and Bill gave a terrific speech, and inspiring speech.
Could you talk more about what you've done to kind of rebuild the machine, so to speak? You talked about the database and that piece of it, but is there more to it than that?
Yep, voter registration. Here's a little data for you. Numbers for you. Washington State has 4 million registered voters. We have 5.5 million eligible to vote in our state. So 1.5 million people are on the table. And we believe an awful lot of them would vote Republican if they were registered.
Now, what makes you think that?
Because of the demoralization of the state. We win elections in Whatcom County by pointing out that the Democrat opponent is a Seattle-style politician. We win elections in Snohomish County by pointing out that the Democrat is a Seattle-style politician. So there is tremendous power in associating issues and candidates with the negative of Seattle. And, you know, I live in Seattle. It's a great city, but it is not as great as it once was. And I'm one of the few that says in my Seattle Art Museum board meeting, I am deeply concerned that the streets of Seattle are empty. And I don't mean because everybody's on a bike. I have lived and worked in Seattle for 35 years, and I have never seen the downtown core such a ghost town. And the reason why is because the offices are empty. Now, there's a beehive of activity around Amazon at South Lake Union, and I asked a community development expert about it as we were talking about the future of, you know, institutions like some of our wonderful museums and cultural sites. And I said, I know you said King County is booming, but what about Seattle? And he kind of, and he wouldn't answer the question because he didn't want to admit that people are not able to thrive and grow their businesses in Seattle, and they're moving the jobs and the people out.
Why so? Why is that so?
Well, you know, Bill Bryant talked about it last night, and it kind of breaks your heart because those of us who love, I am a military kid, so I've lived a lot of places, but my grandparents lived in Tacoma all my life, and they were immigrants, a German and a Norwegian. And they moved to Tacoma from New York City, where my mom was born, and coming to Washington State as a child, we'd come on the train, was such a thrill because Washington was really different than the other Washington. And so those of us who don't want, I don't mean that we don't want it to change, but we don't want it to go backward. We want it to be this special corner of the country. And Bill addressed it last night, and he said, I have a friend who has a company. I believe it was a fruit distribution kind of a company. He does a lot of work in Eastern Washington, Bill Bryant, in fruit exports and in his business. And he said he wanted to expand, grow his plant in square footage, and he wanted to employ more people. And he said, and every attempt you make to do that, you come into the culture of no. And it's the agencies and the bureaucracy and the regulators who line up around the board table and give you all the reasons why you can't do it. And then he says, and I'm wooed by another state, and I sit at a board table, and they've got all their folks sitting around their table, and they're saying all the reasons why it's yes, and that they want me there. So why would I keep my business here when I can't grow it? And I have to grow it in order to survive. Why would I keep it here instead of moving it to the next state that wants my business? And so this is what people keep running up against in this gigantic government that we have now. And here's another statistic. I really like numbers. I think I would prefer to read the baseball stats than watch a baseball game. I mean that sincerely. But here, I decided one day, okay, well, how much are we taxed anyway? We feel a huge tax burden, but are we really? So I studied it for a while, and here's the deal. Let's just talk western states from Texas west, because you can't compare us to the industrial East Coast. So in the west, where we've got lots of land, so there's a lot of space with urban centers, who is the most heavily taxed per capita state in the West? Now, I mean by that is state revenues, in other words, the state taxes. You add them all together, you know, all the various, from the car tabs to the income tax, if you have one, to the property tax, to the sales tax. What state is number one in taxing its citizens per capita?
Clark County.
Close. I mean, what?
You're going to say
subsidy-
Washington.
No, number one is California.
Okay.
Yeah, you would think that, wouldn't you? I mean, from what we know about what's going on in California.
Yeah.
I mean, people are moving out in droves. It's the only state in the West that I think is having a negative growth.
Well, and actually, the LA Times has reported several times this year about jobs booming in California and companies are moving there. So I think the narrative often is inaccurate regarding California growth.
Well, you just look at the, maybe things have changed this year, but, and we certainly know that Silicon Valley is thriving, but, if you look at the stats, it is negative growth in California. But anyway, they're number one. So what is number two of all the states in the West?
That would have to be us.
It's us. And it's significantly higher than the other states. And so, and the reason why is hard to explain because we're the one without the state income tax. So what would happen if we put a state income tax on top of all these other taxes?
Well, and again, to play devil's advocate, and because we can play with numbers all day, according to Forbes earlier this year, Washington ranks 24th nationally in overall tax burden per capita.
Okay, I'm thinking about the statistics that I looked at nationwide.
And I don't know how many western states were among us, but.
Yeah, I just compared western states, although I did look at all of them, and I'm just trying to think if that jives with the numbers I was looking at. I think my numbers were 2013. But that could be.
Go ahead.
That could be. But we are number 2 in the West.
Okay.
So, so we're not undertaxed. There is no reason why Jay Inslee and Frank Chop had to raise taxes, no matter what, and drag us into 3 special sessions in order to do it. And of course, they lost in that effort. But they dragged it on and on to try to accomplish it. So why? Why can't we live within our means? What is this new philosophy on the left that is, we just need more money, more money, more money? And you know the incredible Prop 1 in Seattle that passed on Election Day, which was condemned even by the Seattle Times, has no restriction on that money. It's supposed to go to transportation, but it doesn't have to. So, and I can explain, my beliefs about why that passed. But thinking people knew that it was not good governance. And so property taxes are going to increase so much for the middle class on 3 props that were passed that I fear for citizens who bought their houses 25 years ago. They've increased in value. They don't want to move, but they can't afford them anymore because of the property tax. So it's quickly making Seattle an unlivable place. And this is, somebody said last night that I am a person that, when I was being introduced, that I'm a person that likes to win. Well, I mean, all of us like to win if we're in a competition, but that's not why I have this job. I have this job because I want Washington State to be the best state that I could live in. And my friends and my family and my fellow citizens. And I think that that's why you're in the business you're in. I mean, you're in the newspaper business, Lou, I would guess, because you have great concern for the welfare of the people. And we all know, I ran a foundation for a billionaire. I know how the billionaires live. And believe me, there is nothing we can do that changes them significantly in the way that they, if you're of the ilk that you envy their wealth and want to punish them for it, there's no way that government policy can affect them. They just figure out a way around it, and that's fine. But the vast majority of the taxpayers, which fall into the middle class, which is where I am and where most of the people are, the vast majority of us are suffering, and we are looking at alternatives. Now, it may have been an emotional response, but every person in my office came into work who lives in Seattle the day after Election Day and said, my spouse, husband, wife said, we have to move. And we can't stay in Seattle. Now, we're all in that vast middle class, certainly those of us working in a political party. And that's my concern. I mean, there comes a point where unless America really changes, we still have freedom of movement. And once you lose,
Except in Seattle.
yeah, that's right, because it's
Transportation challenge.
transportation, yeah. Exactly.
Lou, anything else?
Not for me.
Great. Well, Susan, thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate your time.
I just want to say thank you also for meeting with me, and I hear about you all a lot. You're probably mentioned more by a county party, or I shouldn't say party, but just folks I know in the county. They're not necessarily associated with the structure. You're mentioned more than anybody ever mentions a newspaper.
Good.
And so
That's good.
there's clearly a sense of that you're involved in the community.
We are happiest when there's a strong Democratic and a strong Republican Party. That is what we like to
Yeah.
see a lot.
Keeps
Because
it interesting.
a desperately weak party on either side is trouble.
And I think that that's what we've had for a lot of years at the state level. So that's what we're hoping to change.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thanks.